In the last lesson, I talked about the importance of emotional connection. Even as adults, we want a safe and secure attachment to another human being. And in this lesson, I'm going to offer you some guidelines for doing this, for establishing or reestablishing a positive connection with your spouse as a way of preventing or overcoming the toxic patterns that we talked about a few lessons back. A lot of these are actually communication strategies, and I'll do a much deeper dive into communication and conflict later in the program. But for now, use these to interrupt negative patterns that keep you from progressing towards friendship and love. Number one is to clarify your outcomes. It's helpful at the beginning of an interaction, especially when emotions are running high, to be clear about the outcomes you want. If not clear, it's so easy to slip into the toxic patterns of reacting. And I don't think you deliberately choose to hurt each other or damage your relationship, but you back into those toxic behaviors in the heat of the moment because you've not thought about what you really want, about what's most important to you. So let me be clear about what I mean by outcomes. I'm not talking about content. I'm not talking about the task at hand. I'm really talking about relationship outcomes. Outcomes like showing respect, building trust, preserving goodwill and unity, making it safe to talk, really listening and hearing your partner out, and so on. If you haven't clarified the importance of such outcomes, again, it becomes easier to slip back, to slip into criticizing and accusing, escalating, blaming, punishing, invalidating, or withdrawing. If you have clarified outcomes, you move naturally away from these tendencies and towards establishing a more positive connection. Second guideline is to use a soft startup. John Gottman, one of the best known and respected relationship researchers in the world, tells us that the way a conversation begins is the way it will end 96% of the time. If a conversation starts on a harsh tone like criticism and accusations, sarcasm, name-calling, blame, etc., it will almost certainly end on a harsh tone. A hard startup will doom you to failure. So if you find that that's happening, it's best to back off. Perhaps take a time out and then start over. Number three, avoid flooding. Flooding is overwhelming your spouse with negative emotion. It doesn't mean that you can't bring up negative emotion or you can't talk about it during a conversation, but you don't want to do it in a way that leaves your partner feeling defenseless and shell-shocked. If you're in danger of flooding your spouse or you're feeling flooded yourself with emotion, then it's best to call a timeout. Take a little bit of a bit of a break so that one or both of you can cool down before you continue the conversation. Guideline number 4, use repair attempts. Repair attempts are efforts to de-escalate tension during a sensitive conversation. Most all couples are going to experience tension and conflict and even say and do things that are harmful from time to time. The important thing is to recognize when this is happening and do something to back off. Some couples do this quite naturally. Others need to learn and be on the lookout for such opportunities. Repair attempts can take many different forms. Some are nonverbal, like a playful look, making a face, wadding up a napkin and throwing it at your spouse. Other attempts are verbal. Hey, I'm sorry, that wasn't very sensitive of me. Or I really don't want to fight about this. Or can we start over? Or it seems like we're escalating. Let's take a break. Give me a minute to calm down. All of these are examples of what I mean by repair attempts. Their success or failure are very predictive of marital success. These attempts are helpful not only because they change the tenor of a conversation, but also because they relieve the physiological distress that couples are experiencing, and they prevent you from feeling flooded. Number 5, avoid building your case. It's so easy to fall into proving yourself right and your partner wrong. Pretty soon you're locked into positions, and so you're polarized. You stop listening to each other. You've heard the old saying, you can be right or you can be happy. There is so much truth in this statement. A good marriage takes some flexibility. There's always truth in both points of view. So what works is to let go of thinking that you're right and instead to seek understanding. 6, make it safe for your partner to talk. And this naturally follows from the last guideline. Resistance and animosity melt away as you make it safe for your partner to talk. And you do this as you learn to listen, to practice non-defensive listening and vulnerable listening, which we'll talk about later. Your purpose is not to convince or persuade your partner about your point of view, but rather understand his or her point of view. Listening has so many benefits. It helps you gain better understanding of a situation in your spouse. It helps you dissipate negative feelings. And it even softens your spouse so he or she is more open to hearing your point of view. It's one of the most important skills you can develop to improve your relationship. Number 7, be willing to be vulnerable. This is sharing your needs, wants, and fears openly with each other. It's also allowing your partner to do the same. Being vulnerable means that you take off a protective shield of armor so that you can be open and soft. It includes taking risks to be more truthful as well as more open and less defensive when your partner is upset with you. Not always easy to do. But we've been taught to be strong, and we think that means putting on a stoic exterior and never revealing our softer feelings like loneliness or hurt or embarrassment. It actually takes more courage, great courage and strength to be vulnerable. Guideline 8, counsel together. This is seeing your marriage, I should say, as a partnership. It's allowing your partner to influence you as you make decisions which affect both of you together. This comes from a belief that 2 heads are better than 1 and that you'll come up with better solutions by counseling together rather than letting one spouse dominate and the other take a back seat or play a more submissive role. In fact, a long-term study of 130 newlywed couples found that by 8 years of marriage, those men who were more flexible and allowed their wives to influence them had happier marriages and were less likely to divorce. Statistically, if a man is not willing to share influence with his wife, there's an 81% chance that that marriage will end in divorce. Of course, it's equally important for women to be open to influence. However, research also shows that women, even in unstable marriages, do this more naturally than men. And as men learn to be more flexible and listen to input from their wives, they have happier marriages. This is a huge cultural shift for some men in some particular cultures and women who grew up in more traditional patriarchal homes. Well, the value of these guidelines is to learn to be there for each other as you go through the inevitable ups and downs and as you experience the hardships of life. There are ways to create a safe space and secure attachment for each other. And if you're going through this course together, then you can learn to do this with and for each other. If you're the only partner that's going through the program, then the value is to use these strategies on your own and thereby change the dynamics of your relationship. It really only takes one of you. So once again, we'll be talking much more about communication later in the program. But in the meantime, I want to encourage you to use these strategies to begin creating a softer and more secure attachment in your relationship. In the next lesson, I'm going to do an overview of the habits of successful relationships.